Otherwise, economic growth prospects remain subdued. We would be lucky to break the 1% growth mark on the current trajectory, given the many impositions that are in place from monopolies in state-owned entities, and in this case, especially Transnet. In the CRA's latest macro review for the month of September, entitled South Africa's Transport Blues, we tried to unpack the situation in transport in South Africa, from transport infrastructure to the forms of infrastructure that South Africans rely on. We look at the data and try and analyze what this can tell us about the way that people move around, what impact that has on business activity, as well as on the economy. To start off with, a few highlights from the macro review from the leader, written by CRA analyst Makone Maja, with assistance from Gerbrand van Heerden. Firstly, in 2022, 82% of monthly public transport trips to and from work were by minibus taxi, compared to 14% by bus and just 4% by train. Now, that shows us the great importance of minibus taxis for South Africans moving to and from work, and also moving to and from home. Commuters bear the brunt of disruptions, especially when this occurs implemented by taxi associations, and also in turn when the fuel price increases. On the subject of the fuel price, our macro review finds that since 2008, the two largest levies are the general fuel levy, and that has increased since 2008 by 225%. The road accident fund levy is up by 425% since 2008. The general fuel levy contributes over 5% of all tax revenues collected by the government and is not ring-fenced for spending that benefits road users. So when the fuel price increases, this impacts negatively on those very many South Africans who rely on minibus taxis, and of course impacts negatively on business activity, economic activity, as well as job creation and investment in general. According to the Central Energy Fund, 80% of the rise in fuel prices in general and 86% of diesel prices in particular are due to crude oil price fluctuations. So globally, of course, when oil prices increase, that impacts negatively on South Africa. But of course, we score many own goals in that regard in terms of those taxes that we impose that I mentioned before. Moving on a bit to focus on South Africa's ports as vital for transport, for the moving of goods and services into and especially out of the country, given how much we rely on commodity exports. Almost on a yearly basis, South Africa's ports are ranked at the bottom of the Container Port Performance Index. If one looks at dwell times, port dwell times, that is, for example, a source of significant disruption, delays, and increased costs of imports and exports. The average global export dwell time in the second quarter of this year was 4.4 days, but South Africa's dwell times ranged between 5 and 8 days, so massively above the average. In terms of those figures on the Container Port Performance Index, for the 2022 edition, South African ports were ranked very low. Out of 348 ports assessed, Durban was ranked 341st, Cape Town 344th. Moving on next to Transnet, we've talked a little bit about ports, but also talking about rail now. If one looks at railway journeys, for Transnet in 2017, as we found in our macro review, Transnet transported 226 million tons of goods by train. By 2022, Transnet could only manage 154 million tons. Owing to Transnet's incapacity, many businesses have therefore turned to road freight, resulting in a road-to-rail ratio of 8:1 by tonnage, as well as added costs. When costs increase, when Transnet is unreliable, when the railways don't exist, the railway tracks don't exist, companies are forced to use road transport. That increases their own costs in terms of fuel, tire wear, vehicle wear, as well as security issues when strikes and disruptions occur. Copper cable theft, another issue for Transnet that we found in our macro review. Copper cable theft alone led to the loss of 1,500 kilometers of cable in 2021-22. That is roughly the distance between Pretoria and Cape Town. Moving on to passenger rail journeys, and if we go all the way back to the start of this discussion when we talked about the number of journeys that South Africans use, the number of South Africans that rely on minibus taxis for public transport. This is linked directly to the crash, we should rightly call, of passenger rail trips, passenger rail journeys. This number, the number of passenger rail journeys, crashed by 97% between 2008 and 2022, owing to ailing infrastructure and aging rolling stock. Rail maintenance, which requires external sourcing of parts for repairs, is also increasingly neglected. The upside here, the risk here, this has led to incessant delays and cancellations, making trains inoperable, uncompetitive, inefficient, and generally unattractive for consumers. All of this then impacts negatively on economic activity, makes it all the more difficult for the economy to grow. Largely, we talk a lot about unlocking economic growth for South Africa. This cannot happen without cheap, reliable, well-upgraded public infrastructure in terms of transport for trade and also for commuters, for small businesses, for bigger businesses, for mining, for agriculture across the board. When transport infrastructure collapses, it impacts negatively on the economy across the board. South Africa needs to return to the basics and fix all transport-related elements that cost the economy billions. Otherwise, economic growth prospects remain subdued. We would be lucky to break the 1% growth mark on the current trajectory, given the many impositions that are in place from monopolies in state-owned entities, and in this case, especially Transnet. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you found this episode insightful and useful. If you would like access to this macro review, as well as all of the other research and services that the CRA provides, we invite you to become a subscriber of the CRA. You can find the link in the description below. Head to our website and explore the subscription options. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh for the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.